adaptive challenges can really grow you as a leader, or it could actually wish you were never born. Couldn't resist putting the picture of actor Stephen Yeun up here from The Walking Dead, right? So many adaptive challenges that came in this fictional world where most of the world's population became zombified. So a lot of people stepped up. I think he was a pizza delivery boy in the beginning of the series, and ended up being one of the very courageous leaders of the group. But at the same time, I mean, I'm sure he had moments. I know he had moments where he wished he was never born. There's just so much about the world that he had known and fit in that had changed for good. Robert Quinn, in his seminal book Deep Change, which is really the book prior to Building the Bridge as You Walk on It, has some great quotes in here, and I wanted to share them with you. Acting on a vision that exceeds our resources is a test of our vision, faith, and integrity. When present resources determine the future, we have a plan, not a vision. A vision leads toward a plan that exceeds present resources. Okay, so let that sink in. We're not just talking about money. I mean, money is part of it, but some of it is human resources. Maybe, you're a church startup and you just have like 2 handfuls of people. There's all kinds of, or the people that you have don't necessarily have what you believe you're going to need in terms of spiritual gifts and talents and energy and availability in order to move towards this transformational vision. But there's a huge difference between a plan, which is based on using known resources, and actually a vision which stretches us far beyond our resources. So I just want to make sure that you get that square in your head, that a vision leads toward a plan is not really a vision. It's just utilizing resources. Deep change throughout a system means sacrifice and suffering for everyone. It also means engaging in real conflict. It is not very pleasant. I think especially those of us who come from conflict-averse cultures, less confrontational or non-confrontational cultures, this factor alone is enough to make us shy away from, run in the opposite direction of a vision that leads to real deep change. Our authors, some of our authors have already said, every change means loss, and people mourn losses, but change is inevitable. Not all changes, but you can't stay the same. So you have to kind of pick which change you're willing to die for. For transformational leaders, the vision is more important than personal survival. Their credibility is their behavioral integrity, the alignment of every action with the vision. People watch their leaders and quickly recognize the leader's personal discipline and commitment. If the leader's words are empty, they ignore the vision until it dies. I feel like this quote alone from Quinn from Deep Change should probably be carved into the wall of your office if you have one, right? Or should be right next to your mirror where you get ready in the morning before you go into work. People are paying attention. And again, these are not new things. We've talked about these things before. You have to go on a hero's journey first. You have to be looking for deep change in that direction. And then you need to have the behavioral integrity to start behaving in such a way that it's unmistakable to everyone that's watching that you are on this journey already. Okay? That last part, if the leader's words are empty, right? If it's all talk, if it's calling them to do something that the leader isn't already doing him or herself, they just ignore the vision until it dies. And I think that happens so often because it's just words. It's not really about deep change. It's not about ushering in some part of the kingdom of God into not just our church and in our midst, but it's also into the community. The transformational paradigm transcends the rational planning process. It's concerned with deep change, with exploring new areas, trying new methodologies, and reaching new goals. The means to the desired end cannot be specified. They can only be learned as a part of a risky action learning process. So this is where I think a lot of people get thwarted, they get challenged, or maybe you challenge yourself, say, but I don't know how I'm going to get there. I don't know how we're going to get there. It's like, well, it's in the going in that direction that God will teach us and break us down, that God will show us where we lack and what we need. and actually open us up to new possibilities, new people, new behaviors. You know what I'm saying? It's wanting everything all spelled out ahead of time that's actually going to keep you and your ministry from learning the very things that can only be learned by going out there in the following the Missio Dei. Deep change is not about checklists or recipes, and if that's how you're wired, if that's how the leaders in your church or the members of your church are wired, that they want to see the plan, this is gonna fly in the face of that. This is about figuring out where you are and where you need to go, and then launching an effort to get there. And then it's about the learning, right? That's as much as you can really state honestly, but it's enough. It's enough to get you going. All right, so how do we break this down? Quinn talks about 4 clear phases that are involved in the transformational cycle, either for the individual, the leader, him or herself, and or for the organization itself. So the first phase is the initiation phase, and this is again, this is the hero's journey. This is kind of when you start to vaguely hear the call and you start to vaguely get unsettled, but there's a little bit of learning, and certainly there's a initial confrontation of one's unwillingness to go, or to take it even further, what Quinn talks about earlier in this book, Building the Bridge. In the initiation phase, we have to face our own hypocrisy. Like, you know what? Even though on paper, even though my prayers and the songs that we sing is all about going in that direction, I'm a hypocrite, and our church is a hypocrite because we really have no intention of doing that, and just confessing that. And then you leave. You leave the known. You leave the status quo, and maybe you don't go very far, but you certainly don't have a clear map, right? You don't have all the means all spelled out, but you know you can't stay here, and it's in that direction, and you see the evidence of the Missio Dei, of God's activity, but is the uncertainty phase, and this is important to understand that it's the next phase. It's not a certainty phase. You won't know many of the details that some people are demanding. Maybe even you're demanding from God or from yourself, but you've got to get through the second phase. Finally, if you hang in there enough in the uncertainty phase, you enter the transformational phase, and this is where deep change really begins to happen as you're out there, right? You're out there beyond your resources, and you're having to really trust in God, and you're having to trust for God to provide the things that you know you don't have. And you're going to learn things about yourself and about God and about each other. This is where transformation happens. And hopefully, once this really takes root and you become kind of this altered community, at some point, many of those new things, new ways of thinking and behaving and being and going, they become routine. It's the routinization phase. And, that sounds boring, but hey, you know what? It's nice when you've got mastery and you're kind of learning. You don't have to keep learning all the time. That gets really tiring. But then that can get stale, and you start going into the cycle of slow death. And once again, you have to experience deep, meaningful change. And I think God has us go around and around and around this transformational cycle, instead of doing it all in one giant cycle because of God's, I think, compassion. God knows we can only digest so much, and so we just kind of take certain size bites, and then we chew on it, and we swallow it, and it becomes part of us, and then around we go again. If you want to see it a little bit more detailed, again, you see in the rectangles on the outskirts those 4 phases: initiation phase, uncertainty phase, transformational phase, routinization phase. But I like this more detailed one. And, if you're teaching this, and I've done this, I put my daughter's picture up there with our puppy, who's now a 120-pound dog. But I say, even just like getting married or choosing to have and raise a child, there's very, very much the parallels, right? So in the initiation phase, maybe you're at a point in your marriage where things are getting kind of stagnant, everything's so routine, and kind of a desire is born. It's like, you know what? Let's bring a child into this circle. But then right away there's a chicken exit, the fear of failure. Like, wait a minute, who are we talking about? We've never been parents before. Our parents were dysfunctional to some degree. And it's easy to talk yourself out of going on this journey of parenthood, and so you just stay where you are. But if somehow you're able, for different reasons, to overcome that fear of crashing and burning, you allow the desire to burn bright enough to get you going, and now you have a vision. And again, we're talking about parenting. You have this vision of what it's going to be, and so you adopt a child like what we did, or you get pregnant and the child is born, and you have this whole idea of not only how the child is going to be, but also how your new family is going to be. But it's real easy for you to start seeing the reality up against the preferred vision, and you start to wonder, did we bite off more than we chew? Were we just kind of dealing with an illusion, like nobody can do this in the way that we were wishing and hoping, and this child is colicky, and I'm losing my temper, right? And now you got to stick with it. That's another chicken exit, to just talk yourself into, no, this is a total illusion. Now, when you have a kid, you don't have the option of going, okay, let's just return the kid to the store. I mean, you got to keep going. And so this is where you enter the experimentation part. Now you're starting to enter the uncertainty phase. Even if you have raised pretty well a first kid, if you have another kid and another kid, I mean, each kid you'll find is different than the other kids. And so there's always a matter of experimentation. And you're at different phases in your own life stage as these different kids come into it. And again, it's easy to have another chicken exit here, the red arrow, where you start to panic. And it's like, hey, everything I'm trying, most of it's not working. But again, you don't get to return the kid to the store, and you press on, you press forward in this time of uncertainty. And slowly, not on a timetable, not on a schedule, but if you're paying attention, even from your mistakes, you gain insight. You gain insight into raising this child, of being a parent, of being a co-parent with your spouse if you're married, right? And as you start to appreciate these insights, at some point, you're going over the top of the circle here, and you start to get confirmation. You get feedback. It's like, yes, like those insights are true. They're right. We're better at doing this and not doing that, and saying this and not saying that. And now you start to experience synergy. And synergy is kind of spontaneous energy. It's not about the effort you put in. It's like it becomes easier. But as you're getting into the synergy phase, sometimes you're just exhausted, and that's your other chicken exit here. This is the beginning of the transformational phase, but sometimes just getting there is so exhausting that people they can't maintain, and they bail, and they go all the way back to routine and stagnant. But again, just as in the other phases, you have to push through in the transformational phase to really get to more and more synergy. And at some point, the synergy produces mastery. Now you really aren't as freaked out, right, at whatever the kid is doing, even though the kid is going through their own phases and changing. It's like some of it, you're not always going back to zero. It's not chutes and ladders, right? There is some progress. And at some point, hopefully, it becomes routine. Like you really feel much more adept and comfortable being a parent. And that's great, and that's wonderful. This is the routinization phase. But at some point, any routine, even having and raising children, becomes a stagnant thing. And hopefully you have this new desire at some point to actually go on the journey again. All right? So that hopefully makes sense. Now, let's take a look at this. You may not be married, you may not have or want kids, but now think about yourself and your ministry, and the same thing. Like, things are routine. Quinn would say things are in a slow death cycle. A lot of entropy is increasing. You're stagnating, and maybe God's Holy Spirit plants a desire, a vision, a spark in you. And then right away you blow it out, right? Because of the fear of failure, you're in the initiation phase, right? But if you got to push through that, and you have to really decide and determine if this is truly from God, and it's worth it, and it wasn't supposed to be easy anyway. A vision begins to grow out of that, right? As you make sense of all of that, you have to push past this little voice in your head that says, well, it's all a pipe dream, and avoid that chicken exit. Now you actually have to do things differently, right? You can't just do things the same and think it's going to be different. That's the definition of stupidity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. No, you have to experiment. Now you have to experiment with certain outcomes in mind, and not just the goals, but even what's going to happen to you and the people you're traveling with. And then the panic sets in because some people are unhappy and there's too many mistakes and too many people got hurt, right? This is the uncertainty phase. But those who stick through it and stick with it, you start to gain insight, and those insights become confirmed, right? Confirmation. This is real. This is true. This is how God has called us to be part of the Missio Dei at this time, in this place. And now you're starting to enter the beginnings of the transformational phase. But before you get to the synergy, exhaustion, I mean, so many people, especially in church plants or starting a new ministry within the church, they poop out. I mean, it's just really a lot of hard work, and there's a lot of work in just working out the relational stuff. And the exhaustion is real, and it's easy for people to just forget it, right? But if you can stay with it, the synergy will happen, and it begins to kind of produce its own energy, even from seeing the fruit of your efforts, right? Even seeing people just excited about God and this amazing experience with God that is not so fraught with legalism and moralism. And at some point, the synergy becomes mastery, where it's the new paradigm, it's the new reality. Everyone's operating. It's like learning a new dance, right? In the beginning, you're stepping on each other's toes, but if you stay with it, at some point, especially if you're dancing with the same partners, with the same goals, it becomes effortless, right? And it looks effortless. And then it becomes routine. And you're realizing, we're starting to stagnate again. We're doing the same moves over and over again. Or maybe a new adaptive challenge, or the previous one has shifted, right? And we need to deal with this in a different way. And once again, you're going to be confronted with the call to let desire birth again, overcome the fear of failure, and off you go. And again, understand this happens around and around and around. If you're going to stay in ministry for decades like I did, you're going to experience this personally and organizationally so many different times. But understand, to bail on the whole transformational cycle is to basically accept routinization, stagnation, and slow death.